Okay, some more roster changes today. First one up, we have Team Secret. This announcement for the drops had already come out when I did the previous video. I just forgot to talk about it, but now we actually have their replacements. So let's talk about the drops really quickly. We have Packball and Gumpy. The Packball thing was obvious. This happened mid-stage after, like 2 or 3 games. Then their coach had to step in, and they performed surprisingly well, I think, with a few surprise wins. And then even in some of the games that they lost, they got a sort of surprising number of rounds on the board. But of course, you don't want to play with the coach forever. Gumpy hadn't been doing too well for quite a while, I suppose. And now this Slebin and Gumpy duo finally gets broken up. And who do they get replaced with? Well, we have Saves and Savage. So Saves played on Na'Vi not too long ago, just got dropped fairly recently. He was always a pretty consistent performer, I think, on that roster, never doing too bad. I don't know if he was ever quite a standout performer, but yeah, probably brings a pretty a solid performer and a very experienced player onto this secret roster. I suppose they're pretty experienced overall. But then on the other hand, we do have Savage, who doesn't really have any experience at all. I don't think he even played in T2, right? Wasn't he just bouncing around T3 for just a little bit? He played in like Yukon or something. But I guess he must have performed pretty well if he's getting the call up this quickly. And it's always exciting to watch a player, especially when they just skip T2. But whenever a player gets a call-up from wherever it is for the first time to T1, and we have another case of that coming up in a minute. But yeah, will this be enough for Team Secret? We're going to have to find out. They're certainly going to want to avoid relegation, but that's not quite on the table just yet. They didn't do that well in stage 1, but we still have 2 more stages to play, not just 1. But so maybe better to try to get some more points on the board in stage 2 rather than wait till after that stage to make a change like this. So we'll see how they perform. I don't expect them to be world beaters after this, but I think it's possible. Maybe they end up being a solid mid-table team. Maybe they'll even be able to squeak their way into top 4 and make it to a major. We'll have to see. Let's continue talking about some EU. We have Rips being dropped by Rogue, and I don't know if this one was rumored, maybe it was, but the pickup I think certainly was, which we'll talk about in just a second. But Rips, yeah, I think the most obvious drop, hadn't been doing too well on the team. His stats were always pretty poor, and was sort of always a support player, but I don't think he was even like the hard support, right? So maybe he had contributions that we couldn't see, comms and whatever, but yeah, his stats were pretty poor, and yeah, I do think the most obvious drop. So Rogue, they were fighting for major to go to the major even up to that last day, right? They had a chance and they just didn't make it, unfortunately for them. But now maybe with the new pickup they will be revitalized. We have Spoit. Okay, so he's sort of thought of as the European Bolo, and if he's anywhere near as good as Bolo turned out to be, then I mean Rogue, this could be quite good for the roster. So I mean Bolo now a world champion. I think when he first got picked up there were a lot of people that thought he was going to do extremely well. He also had his doubters, and maybe he's proven his doubters wrong now by going on to win SI, and even before that being a pretty successful roster, being TSM being one of the top teams in NA for quite a long time now. And so yeah, Spoit, if you can do that sort of thing, I'm sure Rogue will be quite happy. Rogue is an org, and Rogue is a current team. They've had their ups and their downs. Rogue used to be in NA, then they were in APAC. When they were in NA, they were like one of the top teams for quite a while. In APAC, I think they were also pretty decent, but now they're in EU, and they've been on the top and they've been on the bottom. They've gone to majors, and at least some amount of the time they've done well, and then some amount of the time they did not so well. And yeah, just they'd love to make it back to another major at the very least. And I mean, I suppose they have a good shot considering they maybe replaced their worst player with a very promising player, and even before they made this replacement, they just barely missed out on the major. They'd also love to avoid relegation, but that doesn't seem like the most pressing issue for them. Making top 4, making the EUL finals, going to majors and whatever is what they're looking for, and I think they have a good shot at doing it. This team just played in this Gamers Without Borders. I think they're still in, right? They lost in their first round versus a T2 team, so it was Heroic and Rogue versus both non-T1 teams, and then they both lost. And then I think Rogue played Heroic and they won. Rogue won, so Heroic's out, the top EUL team is out, and Rogue continues on. I think it was pretty close. They went all 3 maps, but then the last map, Rogue kind of smashed them. So I think they play again today to see if they can make it to the grand final of their respective qualifiers. So, I mean, if you want to watch that, tune in. That might be going on now, actually. I'm not sure. But okay, we'll move on to the next thing. We're over to NA now. Mirage picking up Kento. So they dropped Razor, they dropped Thomas, and so they have 2 slots to fill. One of them is Kento. The other one is rumored to be Nyx. I think that's pretty well confirmed. It is a little bit strange for them to pick up Nyx because they just dropped Nyx pretty recently. Mirage, yeah, so I talked about relegations earlier for some of the other teams, but they are in last place in the league. They certainly need to get more points on the board if they want to avoid relegation. And again, there are still stages 2 and 3 to be played, but of course they are they are the most likely team to be relegated at this moment. And the two teams that are just above them are TSM and Sonics. So those are teams that you definitely expect to bounce back in stages 2 and 3 and do quite well. So it's looking pretty dangerous. Even the team next above those two is Parabellum, and we'll talk about Parabellum in just a second. But okay, yeah, Kento and Nyx, mostly talking about Kento here. This makes this a really fresh roster overall, with Kento first time in T1, and then Marmalade and Melted just got picked up in the previous stage, so this will be only their second stage in T1. And then, so they have some amount of experience. Again, if Nyx comes back, very experienced player, and then Benji's been around for a while. I think still a lot of people are wondering why Benji was not one of the players dropped, but that's not really what I'm here to discuss. But I do think probably a pretty easy team to root for, if for no other reason than the underdog factor. But I suppose if you like Marmalade, Melted, or Kento as players, or just the fact that they are new, just a lot of reasons to root for the team. And so, yeah, I mean, they're going to need your support, and they're going to need to do a lot better than they did in Stage 1 if they want to achieve anything, but also just to stay in the league in general. And so we'll move over to the other Canadian org, right? We have Parabellum, and I suppose Mirage now doesn't even have Canadian players on it, but Parabellum does have a couple. We have Penguin and Eska, and then Kool-Aid's actually American, but maybe some people think he's Canadian because he played on the roster when it was still largely Canadian. Then we have Blaz, who's coming over from Europe. He's French, so I guess maybe French-Canadian adjacent, and then finally Gunner. So Blaz and Gunner are the two new additions. The Blaz thing was known. He just didn't play in Stage 1 due to visa, so we had Wimpy stepping in for him, and he did play in T1 over in Europe, and he didn't do too well. He was on kind of a bad team, but I think he was sort of the standout on that team. And so maybe this will be his first really full shot. Parabellum 7th place in Stage 1, so maybe got a few solid wins on the board, but not the best performing team. They nearly beat Oxygen. They did beat Dark Zero, and maybe they gave a few other teams a run for their money. And okay, so yeah, Blaz and then also Gunner, we just saw both of them premiere in the Gamers Without Borders tournament, the same thing I was talking about for Rogue, but of course Rogue played in the European division, and here we have Parabellum playing. They played against SSG, so I don't know why it was the two T1 teams playing against each other and then the two non-T1 teams played against each other. Maybe there was just no seeding and it was just fully random. But EU, it was like T1 versus non-T1 and whatever. But it doesn't really matter. They almost beat SSG, I suppose. They took them to map 3. They won map 1. Parabellum did. So SSG had to win 2 maps in a row, and they did, and they certainly were expected to. But again, I do think Parabellum put up a better showing than people expected, just based on history and also based on the fact that this is a brand new team. That's their first like semi-official game, I suppose. Not like fully official until we play T1, but they're definitely playing for a lot, so they want to show out. Blaz did really well, I think, on attack and then pretty poorly on defense, and Gunner, the opposite, got like no kills on attack and then got a bunch of kills on defense, so maybe if they can figure out those yin and yang things, then they can really succeed. But yeah, no, a good showing, and maybe if they can just increase their consistency, which certainly will come with time, then they might be a force to be reckoned with. I think also a pretty easy team to root for. Some personalities that I think people enjoy on the team, and then also just the fact that they're a little bit of underdogs, and some really promising players maybe getting a really full shot. Gunner getting the call up, one of the most promising non-T1 players, and then Blaz, again, played in T1 in Europe, but sort of on not such a good team. And then also, I think their assistant coach is new to the league. I'll mention that as well. So let's move on to the next thing. We have Latam Julio being dropped from Ninjas in Pajamas. He's been on this team forever, even before they were with Ninjas in Pajamas. He's played with, I think, Psycho and Kamikaze for a really, really long time. And then even Pino and Muzi, not quite as long, but still quite a while. And I think one of the most highly achieving team, maybe that's not the right way to say that. Their achievements were quite great in 2020 and 2021's SIs, right? They got second place 2020 and then first place 2021. So I think those back-to-back grand finals appearances. That's just one of the highest highs any team has ever had. And then, I mean, certainly just winning an SI, only a handful of teams have ever done that. But they've also had quite low lows. Sometimes they miss out on majors. They get pretty poor placements within Brazil. And a lot of that is in the time when Brazil is quite competitive, especially like last year. But you know, as a team that made those back-to-back grand final performances like that exact roster that now is being broken up, but they'd certainly like to improve their performance. I think it's Kesa, however you say dude's name, is the rumored replacement. I'm not 100% sure if that's going through or not. And I think Julio is rumored to be going to Furia as coach. So I think Twister, their coach, got dropped, and now Julio is supposedly going to be his replacement. And so we'll see. We'll see if that actually happens or not. But I mean, even if he leaves Siege, he can leave with his head held high. He did achieve quite a lot, and maybe Ninjas, without him, maybe they can improve their performance, or maybe they'll be a shell of their former selves. I don't know. We'll see. But okay, moving on to the final two things. These aren't too important. They're just NACL things, but I just thought I'd mention them. Wimpy going to LSR, and this is one of the ones I want to mention. Of course, Wimpy just did play T1, and I think for the longest time people thought Wimpy deserved that T1 call-up. He finally got it, but it had an expiry date on it. It was known that he was going to be dropped after one stage, so I think probably he deserves another full shot. And certainly if he does well on this LSR roster, I think probably he will get that second shot. And then finally we have Gaming Gladiators picking up Barring and Rudy. Rudy played on Beast Coast for a while in T1, and then Barring played on I don't remember what the name of the rod. They became Panic, and I think he still played on it then, but before they were Panic and they were like in LFO roster, he played with Gotcha and Oasis, and also Prod and Young Alec, and that was sort of the roster that sent Prod and Young Alec to T1, the last roster that they played before T1, even if they didn't pan out too well in T1. Maybe that was just to do with the fact that XSET and Beast Coast had issues that ran much deeper than maybe those pickups could resolve. But yeah, I think that does it for the video. So they did announce the NAL schedule, and I think it starts on the 14th, so that's in like 10 days. So maybe tomorrow I'll show the schedule and talk about it a little bit. But other than that, I'll be on the lookout for the rest of the roster changes. Maybe there's a handful that we need the announcement for. Probably enough to fill up another video, but we'll see. Okay, so with all of that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video.